It still frustrates me that among all the new and exciting electric cars coming out in the 21st century, not a single one seems to be a proper, accessible driver's car yet. If they aren't massive SUVs or unreachable hypercars, they're tiny hatches with 100 miles of range. No one really seems to have even tapped into the middle market, unless you count small crossovers from Hyundai and Kia. Thankfully, today, I'm driving something a bit more exciting. An electric car from Mercedes, presumably a sports car or a big powerful estate.
Nah, it's just a big SUV.
This then is Mercedes' first production electric car. It's called the EQC. EQ being the brand new name for all things Mercedes and electric, and C meaning it's about the size of a C-Class. It arrives on the scene to plough right into the market alongside cars like the Audi e-tron or the upcoming BMW iX.
Outside, well, it's a big SUV. There's not a lot here to tell you that it's an electric car at all. It's just sort of big and slightly off-roady. But if you look closely, you will see the little clues that Mercedes left to tell you it's slightly different. Like, for example, in the headlights, there's little blue accents because blue is the colour of electricity, obviously. There's also the fact that the daylight running light at the front goes all the way across the middle over the grille, just like on a Volkswagen hybrid car. It also does that at the back. Unless you shine a torch on the letters EQC on the front, there's really not a lot to tell you this isn't just another Mercedes SUV. I mean, they've even hidden the charging point just in a normal fuel filler cap.
Overall though, it works quite well. The new lights are quite nice to look at, and that face feels different enough to the rest of the Mercedes range to feel a bit new. It also comes on some of the best wheels you'll find anywhere.
Power for the EQC, or the EQC 400 4MATIC AMG-Line, to give this car its Sunday name, comes from 2 electric motors, one for each axle, and 80 kilowatt hours worth of batteries. That's good for 400 horsepower and, far more importantly, 760 newton meters of torque, which sounds like a lot, because it is. But this car weighs 2.5 tons, which also sounds like a lot, and also is. The thing is, you've got to remember that 2.5 tons in the world of SUVs is heavy. But when you consider it's got enough batteries in it to get it roughly 200, 250 miles, that's not world-ending. As usual with any electric car, the climb to 60 miles an hour is swift. 5.1 seconds in this, which, you know, when it weighs 2.5 tons is, well, that's pretty impressive. Now, unusually for driving an electric car, in order to access that torque, you really have to push your foot to the floor. Now, I know you're thinking, Ben, don't be an idiot. Of course you have to mash your foot to the floor in order to have all of the torque, but that's not necessarily right. You see, normally if you twitch your foot down, you get most of what's there, and then it progresses. But in this, there's nothing, and then there's something. There's no progression in the pedal. You really are mashing your foot down in order to gain any proper acceleration. Sadly, the gripes about the driving don't really end with the pedal. I mean, there's a steering wheel, it's there. If I turn it left, it turns the car left. If I turn it right, it turns the car right. But I mean, that's all it does. It's not really going to tell you anything more than the fact that if you turn it, at some point the car will also turn. Then there's the suspension, which is perfectly fine and comfortable in comfort mode, and can survive in eco mode. But it's got a sport mode. I just suggest you don't go anywhere near it. Once you put it into that sport mode, it becomes wide, jiggly. If you're on anything other than a reasonable road like this one, it's really going to be quite uncomfortable. At approaching Corners, if you're going for any kind of spirited driving in this car, then good luck, because you approach a corner and you turn the wheel and you do all the things you normally do, and then you just wait for, whatever's going to happen. There's no real communication or sense that actually you're going to get anything out of the experience. In reality, that's just not what this car is built for. To leave it in comfort mode that's there for longer journeys or around town. And in those cases, it's perfectly fine. That is where this car comes into its own, a comfortable cruiser or a cheap nip around town. There is one thing though that I do really like about the driving experience here, and that's that they've left the paddles for the gearbox on the back of the steering wheel. Now, that might seem weird at first because it doesn't have any gears, certainly not ones that you're going to play with, but they've been repurposed. Now they control how much regen you get rather than gears, which is actually quite useful, because if you're just pootling around normally on a road, you don't necessarily want the regen to be in its strongest form. But if you're heading towards any kind of junction or a T-junction or something, then you can just pull off the gas and crank up the regen as you go, and it brings you to a nice slowdown.
All that being said, who on earth is buying a big electric SUV to hoon around the side roads of Sussex? That market, if it exists, is very, very small. No, the EQC instead sells on comfort, range, and kit. And thankfully, those are three things it does rather well.
So long motorway journeys or cruising around town really is the sweet spot for this car. It's where it's most happy. I did a 250 mile round trip in it the other day. You just stick the automatic cruise control on, leave it in comfort mode, have your heated seat on, and it's an absolute dream. There's really nothing to fuss about. It's got several driving modes you can put it in. There's the comfort and eco as you'd expect, and there's sport mode, but as we've said, it's just where it becomes a bit of a quibbling mess. Then there's maximum range mode, which basically means eco plus mode. But whereas a lot of other cars will hit your maximum range mode by just turning everything off. No air conditioning, no heated seats, nothing. You will just drive, you will be hot or cold, delete as appropriate. Now what this one does is it modifies your driving. Firstly, it changes the pressure that's put into the accelerator pedal, because obviously it's not actually connected to anything. That is all done by electronics. So it changes and puts a pressure point at which it's telling you not to go further than, which gives you the best economy. And then, with its monitoring systems, it will just keep you at the right speed that you're at for local conditions and the speed limit, and it will modify your power up and down. You can watch it as you leave your foot in exactly the same place, and it goes, no, we're going to go down to 1% power rather than 10% now. And it just makes sure that you can, well, I guess, get the maximum range out of it.
Kit, then, is more important in this car, and thankfully, it has plenty. As standard, it has insulated acoustic glass, a big sunroof, electric tailgate, heated seats, digital radio, that fancy new augmented reality Mercedes navigation, and a HUD, and it's even got 64 colour adjustable ambient lighting.
I'm not sure I can name 64 colours, to be honest. But then, there are actually only two things on this car that are optional extras in this spec. That is the colour, blue, and the driver assistance pack. But then, you'd kind of hope that that will be the case, given that the AMG-Line car is £74,000 as standard. Then there's the interior, which is sort of Mercedes meets future. It's very nice. It's got the, it's got the piano black center console you'd expect, and the standout long tablet that's on all Mercs these days, going about 73 meters along the dash. The thing is, it sort of feels a bit like it might be trying too hard. I mean, once you've worked it out, you realise that actually everything in here is really nice, and after a little while it becomes a really nice place to be. But the first sort of look, it just, I don't know, not quite like a Mercedes should be. Also, shiny plastic. Can we get over, we really need to get over shiny plastics in cars, because it's enough with touch screens and fingerprints to have to constantly stare at them without everything becoming greased up the moment that a normal human being sit in here. Once you get past the shininess, it's a perfectly nice place to spend 10 minutes or longer.
The EQC is quite clearly not a car made for a sprint across country B roads. It's also quite definitely a first attempt at an electric car from Mercedes. But for all its faults, if you do use it for what it's actually meant to do, that is, cruise down the motorway or nip around short distances, it's a very pleasant place to be, which is all it really needs to be. It's just that with a Mercedes badge, we had hoped it might have just a little bit more.